Welcome to a special Nvidia-themed episode of the Opening Bid Vodcast. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. All things Nvidia, lots of focus on our platform after Nvidia's earnings. We're seeing the stock go from gains to losses all over the map. Very important off the jump here. I want to get you to what Jensen Huang and CFO Colette Kress, in my view, some of the most important things they said on that earnings call last night. Take a listen.
We're going to have to continue to scale as demand is quite high and customers are anxious and impatient to get their Blackwell systems.
Blackwell fully ramps, we can improve our cost and our gross margin. So we expect to probably be in the mid-70s later this year.
There we go. You heard it from two top executives in NVIDIA. I want to get to my man here, Dan Halley, Yahoo Finance's tech editor. Dan, you were on that earnings call. I can't say that I'm surprised that we're seeing really the stock swing between gains and losses here. You had Jensen say, guys, look, demand is strong. And you had Colette say, look, the first quarter might be the bottom for gross margin this year. Get that ramp in the back half of the year. I've seen everybody come out here and defend this stock this morning, Dan.
Yeah, it seems like going into it, there was kind of a wishy-washy feel from Wall Street. You know, the stock had been down the past few days. This is, the AI company. It's been the AI company. It continues to be the AI company. It will be for the foreseeable future, at least. But it just seemed like during the call, there was a lot of almost putting out fires that didn't necessarily exist within the company, but did for the stock price. And so, an analyst worried about various things within the company, whether that's tariffs, whether that's export controls, whether that's the rise of ASICs or those chips that the likes of Google and Amazon and Microsoft are working on their own. They hit on all of that. And so that seemed to be the tenor of the call overall. And yeah, you saw during it, the price was down, up at first once the print came out, dropped down. During the call, was kind of wavering back and forth between positive and negative. But, I think that was really the kind of key takeaway for me was, putting out these fires that existed for investors, but again, not the company itself.
Dan, I saw no ratings cuts on Nvidia this morning. I saw one price target cut this morning. Didn't really see estimates move anywhere. And I have to think, you think the street is, I guess, do you think we get the upside that people expect with that gross margin from Nvidia this year as Blackwell ramps? I mean, Colette talked a little bit about it in the earnings call, but do you think we can get beyond 73%? What has to happen for it to go right?
I think, she pointed out during the call that, look, this is, so I think there's two things going on here, right? They're ramping Blackwell, so it's still a new technology for them, right? I mean, they had to kind of develop new ways of new interconnects for the actual servers, right? If you look at this thing, I think it's 1.5 tons, right? The full server. They call it a spine in the back. I was looking at when I was at CES, I was looking at the plugs for it, I love
that you're looking at the plugs there.
Oh yeah,
that's why you are our tech editor. You're looking at Nvidia chip plugs.
It looked like something out of Ghostbusters, the size of it. I was like, it's like an industrial kind of thing. So that's. The AI explosion kicked off where their Hopper platform was already out and rocking, right? So it's not like they were developing this. It's not like they were rolling it out. So that's why the margins then were just so great. They were already, ramping and then some. Blackwell, they still needed to develop this and ramp. And so as a result, margins were slightly compressed to the low 70s, right?
Still pretty damn good.
Crazy.
70% plus margins. I dare you to find another company that has margins like this.
It's software companies, maybe yes, but a hardware company. But, I think, as she said during the call, once this is fully ramped up, we're going to get back there. Now, I think one of the things to point out is they also discussed Blackwell Ultra, which is the chip that we'll probably learn more about at GTC next month. And then they hit on Vera Rubin, which is that I think they called it the next tick, where you're going to get the next generation. So Blackwell's predecessor.
Hang with us, Dan. I want to bring in someone else who has been making really bullish Nvidia calls on opening bid before. That is Eric Jackson, EMJ Capital founder and president. Eric, always nice to get some time with you. Are you surprised by this reversal we're seeing Nvidia off the jump here this morning? I have to be honest, Eric, I'm not, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I thought it was a subdued reaction last night. I think this is going to be met with a positive reaction for the remainder of today and into the next few days. The fact is, Brian, this is a stock that's treaded water really for now coming up on 9 months, really. So a lot of expectations have been tamped down. The company sort of shut the lights out on so many metrics last night. But I guess their biggest problem is that when you do 40 billion a quarter, it's kind of hard for the street to say, how does this company get to 60 billion a quarter? In terms of getting excited about the next leg of growth. And I think that's what sort of held the stock back in these last 9 months. And, there was the obvious 1% miss on the guidance for next quarter's gross margins. I mean, obviously there was sandbagging. So, and they're, going to rebound. They guided to mid 70s, which is, as you guys were just saying, it's phenomenal. So, I mean, I think things are good. And I think enough time sort of passed in this sort of consolidation phase where this stock probably can move in the next, over the next few months.
Eric, you were in the digital green room, but I'm sure you heard Dan talk about some potential new products coming from Nvidia at GTC. What is it, March 17th, guys? Like, what do you think investors will hear from Nvidia? I mean, Jensen talked a little bit about it on the earnings call last night, several new products, but do you think that's the next big catalyst, or there could be disappointment there as well from what Nvidia shares?
Yeah, I think everybody's probably going to want to hear more about Rubin, so if they can sketch that out. Now they're getting into sort of like an Apple kind of pacing now, where they're just always sort of guiding a little bit to next year's product that's going to be shipping, which is a little new for them. And get people excited about that. I mean, they've also mentioned that in that March event, they're going to feature a quantum day. This is, of course, after in January when I think it was at CES where Jensen sort of poo-pooed on the whole quantum space and sort of took them down and said it was like 30 years away. And then announced a week later that he's having quantum day in March. So maybe it's not 30 years away. So there might be something interesting there and how they're going to collaborate with some of the other quantum players to try to, keep the latest GPUs exposed to the benefits of quantum.
Eric, this is Dan. I want to ask you talk about how investors were looking for that next leg to get to 60 billion. During the call, Jensen kind of went to pains to kind of explain where they see that next kind of leg of growth coming from. We have obviously the cloud service providers. They said that they made up 50% of sales for the data center this quarter, same as last quarter, and on and on and on. But he did also talk about the consumer side of generative AI as well as the industrial side of generative AI, saying that those are going to be applications that we see more kind of movement in. Do you think that that's actually going to be where we start to see that growth pick up, since right now it really is the data center guys?
Yeah, I do think so. And there are some positive signs. I mean, on the recent Alibaba quarter, they sort of talked about how just in the last few weeks, they'd seen this big shift, albeit over in China, of the hyperscalers there to inference jobs. And so, they obviously made some big announcements with increased CapEx that they planned for this year, which, unfortunately, remains to be seen how much of that, Nvidia will get because of export controls. But I think the market is sort of like in a sort of like a show me attitude towards Nvidia. Like it's one thing to hear Jensen talk about these great opportunities or AI agents for enterprise or whatever. It's another thing to actually see the numbers come in. I think the company has sort of fallen into a pattern in the last few quarters where they guide to a number and then they consistently beat it by 1 or 2 billion, and so that market likes surprises in order to kind of get the stock going and revved up. And so I think that's probably what it's going to take over these next few quarters. Dan is just like for some of these applications to actually bear out in terms of like a meaningful kind of upside surprise in revenue and earnings.
Eric, past few weeks I've been writing a lot about how the Mag 7 is off their 52-week highs, in some case more than double digits. But if Nvidia's stock is going to reverse losses from last night, going to trade higher, up about more than 2% here in the pre-market, if that's the case, in large part because I think Jensen said, hey, demand is incredible, guys. We're not seeing that slowdown. Yeah. Have we seen a bottom or a short-term bottom in Mag 7 names here?
Well, yeah, and maybe the market too. I mean, just Nvidia being flat last night was enough to kind of give a shot in the arm to the entire market, which has obviously been down in the last week. But this was sort of like good enough results to kind of make people feel like hey, maybe it's better, we can get back into some momentum names or something, because and that's what we're seeing in the futures this morning. So yeah, I think this is good enough to help the Mag 7 names as well. Most of which have sort of been down, maybe with the exception of Apple over these last few weeks. So yeah, but Nvidia itself, I mean, that's the big thing. After 9 months churning, are they actually going to sort of break out, to new all-time highs over the next few months? I think so.
Eric, I want to ask about the other chip companies, because I was watching them kind of move around slightly during the Nvidia call. Intel was up, which they have been since those reports about a potential breakup. AMD was also up. They haven't been doing very well, as well as Broadcom. I guess is this kind of a signal to the rest of the kind of AI / CPU server market that things are going to continue to go well? I know that we had kind of the signals from the big tech companies saying, we're going to be spending, Amazon was what, $105 billion this year. I can't remember. Microsoft off the top of my head, I think it was like 75 or something like that. Meta, gobs and gobs of money. Is this just the next signal that they needed to kind of continue to go up, or is this just kind of, okay, things aren't bad, or just they're not interesting enough at this point, we're going to stay flat?
Well, I think that the Nvidia is sort of like in a class of its own. The market didn't believe that maybe a year ago, and kept looking to people like AMD mostly as potential competitive threat. And even last night, I mean, I heard some people talking about how the lower guide on the gross margins was due to competitive pressures. I don't really see that. I just don't see anyone having anything legitimate to compete with Blackwell or Rubin for the next few years in terms of AI with Nvidia. You've had some people like Google themselves or Amazon talk about their own interest in designing their own chips, and people have worried about that as a competitive threat. But again, I think that's overblown. So I don't necessarily see Nvidia's results as sort of a signal that it's a green light for the rest of the chip makers. I think what's most interesting about the other chip makers is I know Brian had a chart that he was showing last night on Yahoo Finance, talking about the different PEs, forward PEs for all these chip makers, and Nvidia was at the bottom of the list. I think you had them at like 29 times, Brian, and below Broadcom, below Marvell, below ARM. And now I don't necessarily see them as deserving like an ARM 85X forward PE, but why is Nvidia, with these, again, consistently good results, trading below at a lower forward PE than a Broadcom or a Marvell? I don't understand it. And so I do think there's sort of opportunity there for Nvidia shareholders to say, hey, this thing can creep up again as people get a little bit more confidence that, hey, Blackwell's delivering and there's more to come and Rubin's on the horizon and so forth.
Not many people do get it, Eric, but maybe sometime eventually they will. Thanks for shouting out that chart. Appreciate you, Eric Jackson, EMJ Capital founder and president. Always nice to see you. Always nice to see Dan Halley, too, working those late hours, Dan, studying NVIDIA. We'll be right back after the break, and we're going to dive into the AI arms race. Welcome back to a special episode of the Opening Bid Vodcast. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sazzi. We're focused all things NVIDIA after its big earnings report. Now I want to focus a little bit on the AI arms race, which in part is helping to fuel the top and bottom lines of NVIDIA. Let's bring in Anjane Midha, A16Z General Partner. Really good to get some perspective here, and good to see you, Anjane. I didn't hear anything in that earnings call from NVIDIA that would suggest there's a digestion period coming from the hyperscalers. And when we say hyperscalers, we're talking about the companies spending billions of dollars to build out AI infrastructure. It's Amazon, it's Microsoft. How did you hear the earnings call? Did you hear or see any red flags?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be on the program. So I think that's a good question, but the important thing you want to understand is that the physics have changed of infrastructure buildouts, right? Not only are hyperscalers obviously important, but hypercenters, right? Hypercenters are regions, not just companies like big tech companies, but these are governments and nation states that want to do massive frontier AI infrastructure development. And NVIDIA calls these the sovereign AI sector or the regional cloud sector. And the hypercenter buying behavior is accelerating unlike anything we've seen before. And so I guess I saw the opposite of red flags. What I saw is an acceleration of the sovereign AI demand. I think that's driven by the idea of infrastructure independence. This is the world's biggest nation saying it's time for us to accelerate AI adoption. We think AI models are critical national infrastructure. We think these AI factories, data centers that turn tokens into intelligence is critical national infrastructure. And I see that segment accelerating. So I think the physics have changed slightly where while sure, hyperscaler demand is important, but hypercenter demand is the story we should be paying attention to.
Just hearing that, it sounds like the market may be underestimating, how much countries are spending to develop AI infrastructure. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that you're going to hear a lot more about these infrastructure build-outs from nation states. Sometimes these are lagging indicators. They often start with with national level sort of nation building agendas. So in Paris, for example, at the AI Action Summit a few weeks ago, the EU announced that they're going to do $100 billion+ infrastructure build out. Right? It takes a while for those to translate into Blackwell purchase orders, but that's just it's a supply chain, right? So yes, I do agree with your sentiment that it might be underreported on. It just takes a while for people to realize that nation state priorities are then turning into enterprise budgets.
I love what you recently wrote on, I think it was a LinkedIn post on your page, the need for a Marshall Plan for AI infrastructure. Talk to us about that.
That's the idea that if you look at periods of history where we've had humanity contend with the emergence of a general purpose technology, right? This is a very specific term, general purpose technology, which economists use to refer to a technology that's broadly an economic progress multiplier across a whole society. And we've only had about 20 or 22 of these in human history, right? Electricity, the printing press. And when that happens, nation state leaders start asking, do we build, do we buy, or do we partner? There was a moment like this, and obviously in post-World War II, when a number of countries were trying to figure out whether they would build, they would buy, or they would partner on the reconstruction of Europe. And I think at that point, America led aggressively by saying we'd like an allied plan to bring our allies along in the face of the biggest infrastructure build out that we've seen in modern times. At the time, obviously, it was civil infrastructure. A number of leading American companies got together, funded by American national security interests, to say it's really critical for us to rebuild Europe and to treat Europe as an ally in the face of adversarial nations who don't have America's interests at heart. I think we're entering a very similar era, right? Today, there's basically two major hypercenters, right? You've got the United States and China. And I think every other major country is trying to figure out, do they build, do they buy, or they partner with one of these hypercenters? And so I think a Marshall AI plan for AI would be akin to an AI grid where if you kind of break down the AI stack, right, you've got chips, models, applications, and then ultimately you've got the interface to AI. It might be agents and so on. The idea that we should have strategic alliances across the stack to make sure that America's interests are staying at the forefront of this infrastructure wave, this infrastructure independence era, is quite critical.
And you're really calling out here, Anjane, some really powerful, I would just call them megatrends, like mega forces that are likely to fuel demand, not only for what Nvidia does, AMD. I'll leave Intel out of it for now because Intel's somewhere over there. But how are you putting money to work right now outside of Nvidia? Like, what investment opportunities are coming onto your desk, and what are you saying yes to, and what are you saying no to?
I think we saw the sort of signs on the horizon 2 years ago, where when everybody else was talking about how scale beats everything else, the size of these AI models beats everything else, I think what we were starting to realize is actually these AI models were starting to look more and more like computing infrastructure from the past. So if you look at the history of computing infrastructure, storage, networking, databases, the arc of adoption is quite similar across all of those primitives. You start with new capabilities. People discover a new primitive. Engineers often try to figure out what it's good for. And then once the largest companies, the enterprises, start figuring out what it's good for, then you get the era of efficiency. You get the era of cheaper, faster, and more control. You get customers wanting to control and customize the technology for their own specific use cases. That's where we're headed right now with AI models. And that's why we led, a fairly large round into a company called Mistral, which is an open source AI model solutions provider. What they do is help the largest mission critical industries, right? Governments, defense, healthcare, finance, that deal with sensitive data that sits on premise. They help them customize models for their specific use case. And this whole reinforcement learning era, this whole reasoning models that we're seeing right now in the post DeepSeek R1, aftermath, is all about specialized models in the enterprise. And so, we led that investment almost a year and a half ago. We're now starting to see the acceleration of those kinds of specialized models in the enterprise take off, not just in the enterprise, but also at the nation state.
In the last minute or so, Anjay, we always love to get hot takes from our guests here on the Opening Bid podcast. I'll put this one too. You recently had a chance, I believe, to talk to Jensen Huang, Nvidia founder and CEO. Being up close and personal with him, what do you think makes him tick as a leader, and why is he so unique?
Jensen is the closest thing to a walking, talking GPU you'll ever meet. Anything he touches, he accelerates. He's like, he's basically a Blackwell chip personified. That's the closest thing I could give you to understand what he's like in real life. The minute he walks into the room, you understand that here's an engineer who brings with him the efficiency, the acceleration of a chip. I think he lives, breathes acceleration.
All right. Well, really, really fabulous insight. Really enjoyed this conversation. Anjay Midha, good to see you. Thanks for all the NVIDIA analysis. We really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. See ya.
All right, and that's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid. Like I always say, continue to hit us with those thumbs up all over the social media platforms and all those likes. I read all of your comments. I try to answer them. I learn a lot by, in fact, reading them. Much more NVIDIA analysis coming up very soon at 9 a.m. on Yahoo Finance. Shauna Smith, Brad Smith, Madison Mills, and a bunch of guests are going to tell you context and insight on NVIDIA you just can't get anywhere else. Talk to you soon.